Little girl was alone in the night. But Hell's Angels biker's unexpected arrival will change her life. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Emma was just a little girl, barely 10 years old, and tonight, she was alone in the cold, dark streets. The wind howled through the empty roads as the last few cars sped by. Emma hugged her jacket tightly around her small frame, the icy night air biting at her exposed skin. Her parents had been gone for weeks, leaving her in the care of her older brother, who, like so many times before, had abandoned her to fend for herself. She had no choice but to walk, hoping to find something familiar in the vastness of the night. The world felt so big and so empty, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was going to happen. Then, as if on cue, she heard the roar of a motorcycle engine in the distance, a sound that seemed to slice through the night. The rumble grew louder, and in moments, a Harley-Davidson appeared around the corner. Emma froze, unsure of what to do. Her heart raced, and instinctively, she took a step back, her eyes wide with fear. The man on the motorcycle looked every bit as intimidating as she had imagined. Leather jacket, tattoos, and the iconic Hell's Angels patch that sent a chill down her spine. But as he drew closer, something in his eyes softened. He slowed his bike and stopped in front of her. The man dismounted, towering over her, his face hard but with a hint of something else, a kindness she hadn't expected. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rough but gentle, like he had been through 1,000 battles, yet somehow still cared. Emma stared at him, unable to speak at first. She had heard stories about bikers, but they didn't match this man at all. "I am lost," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. He nodded, his face unreadable. Without a word, he crouched down to her level, his large hands gently reaching out to help her up. "Come on, let's get you out of this cold," he said, his voice comforting. Emma hesitated for a moment, but something about his presence made her trust him. She climbed onto the back of his motorcycle, holding on to him as they sped off into the night, the wind whipping through her hair. She couldn't believe what was happening. Just moments ago, she was alone and afraid, and now, she was on a ride with a man who seemed like he could protect her from anything. The journey was long, but Emma's fear began to fade as the warmth of the motorcycle and the man's presence surrounded her. They finally arrived at a small garage on the outskirts of town, a place that looked like it hadn't seen much life in years. The man helped her off the bike, guiding her inside. As they entered, Emma noticed the smell of motor oil and old leather. It was a strange place, but somehow it felt safe. He made sure she was comfortable, offering her a seat and some warm clothes. Emma could hardly believe it. This biker, this stranger, had given her more care than anyone else had in a long time. As the night stretched on, she realized that the darkness outside had been replaced with a sense of peace. This man, with his tough exterior and mysterious past, had changed her life in a way she never expected. And for the first time in a long while, Emma allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she would be all right. Emma sat quietly on the old couch, wrapped in the thick blanket that Jake had given her. The garage around her smelled of motor oil and old leather, a scent that seemed to settle into her lungs with each breath she took. It was a strange place for a little girl, but somehow it felt safer than any other place she had been in the past few weeks. She had never imagined that a night like this, full of uncertainty and fear, would lead her to this moment of unexpected peace. Jake, the man who had come out of nowhere to rescue her, was now working at the workbench across the room, his back to her. As he tinkered with something in his hands, his broad shoulders and the tough exterior of his leather jacket made him seem intimidating at first, but now, after spending some time with him, Emma realized that there was more to him than just the biker persona. She had never seen someone who seemed so capable and yet so kind at the same time. Every time he looked at her, there was a quiet understanding in his eyes, as if he could see the fear and confusion she had been carrying for so long. It made her feel, for the first time in a long while, that maybe everything would be okay. As Jake worked on his bike, Emma's mind wandered. She thought about her parents and how she ended up alone on the streets. She had tried so hard to make things work with her family, but everything had fallen apart. Her mother had been distant, her father lost in his own world, and her brother had never been around when she needed him most. For days, she had wandered from place to place, hoping to find someone to help her, but each door she knocked on had been slammed in her face. She had been cold, hungry, and scared. The world had seemed so big, and she had felt so small. But now, here she was, sitting in a garage with a stranger who had shown her more kindness than anyone in recent memory. She couldn't help but wonder how someone like Jake, with his tough exterior and his past that was clearly filled with pain, could be so willing to help a little girl like her. Maybe it was because he understood what it was like to feel lost and alone. Maybe he saw something in her that reminded him of his own struggles. She couldn't say for sure, but what she did know was that she felt safe. The sound of Jake's tools clanking against the workbench broke her thoughts. He turned to her, his face softening for a moment. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Emma looked up at him, her eyes meeting his for the first time since they had arrived at the garage. She hesitated before answering, unsure of how to express everything she had been feeling. "Better," she said finally, her voice small but sincere. Jake nodded as if satisfied with her answer. He stepped closer, then handed her a cup of hot cocoa that he had been brewing on a small stove in the corner of the room. "Drink this," he said, his voice gentle. "It'll warm you up." Emma took the cup, her small hands wrapping around the warm mug as she brought it to her lips. The heat from the cocoa spread through her chest, and for a moment, it felt like the coldness she had been carrying inside was slowly melting away. Jake watched her quietly for a moment before speaking again. "You don't have to be afraid," he said, his voice softer now. "You're safe here." Emma looked up at him, feeling the weight of his words sink in. She had never been told that before, not by anyone who truly meant it. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Jake didn't say anything at first, but the look in his eyes softened. He stepped back, giving her space. "You don't need to thank me," he said quietly. "It's the least I can do." As the night stretched on, Jake continued to work on his bike, occasionally glancing over at Emma to make sure she was okay. Emma sat there, her eyes occasionally drifting to the tools and machines around the garage, but her mind kept returning to the man who had saved her. He was like nothing she had ever known, and she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for the kindness he had shown her. Eventually, as the hours passed, Emma grew tired. The warmth of the cocoa and the comfort of the blanket made her eyelids heavy. She yawned and curled up on the couch, the soft sound of Jake's work providing a steady rhythm in the background. Before long, she was asleep, the weight of the day lifting off her shoulders as she finally found a sense of peace in the strange new world she had found herself in. Jake, seeing that she had fallen asleep, paused his work for a moment. He looked over at her, his face unreadable, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to feel a sense of calm. He had spent so many years running from his past, from the pain and the loneliness, but now, in this small garage with a little girl who needed him, something had shifted. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he was starting to find a reason to stay. Emma woke up the next morning to the smell of fresh coffee and the warmth of sunlight filtering through the dusty windows of Jake's garage. She stretched, feeling the softness of the blanket around her, and for a moment, she thought she was still in her old room at home. But then the reality of her situation came rushing back. She was still in the garage, in a place that felt both unfamiliar and strangely comforting. She sat up slowly, her eyes scanning the room. Jake was nowhere to be seen, but she could hear the faint sound of his boots shuffling across the floor. The garage felt like a sanctuary now, a stark contrast to the cold, lonely streets she had wandered the night before. As she stood up and wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, she heard Jake's voice from the other side of the garage. "Good morning," he called out, his voice rough but warm. Emma turned to find him standing by a workbench, his back to her as he tinkered with a piece of machinery. He looked so focused, so in his element, that for a moment, Emma couldn't help but admire him. "Morning," she replied softly. Jake turned around, his face breaking into a small smile. "You sleep all right?" he asked. Emma nodded, her heart swelling with a sense of gratitude she couldn't quite put into words. Yeah, I did. Thank you. Jake gave a brief nod, not saying anything more. He wasn't one for long conversations, but Emma could tell that the quiet sincerity in his actions spoke volumes. He wasn't looking for thanks, but she couldn't help feeling that he deserved it. She glanced around the garage again. There were parts and tools scattered everywhere, but despite the clutter, there was something oddly peaceful about it. The place wasn't perfect, but it felt real, raw, honest. Emma had spent so much time feeling like an outsider in her own life, but in this moment, she felt like she belonged. You hungry? Jake asked, breaking into her thoughts. She nodded again, the rumbling in her stomach reminding her how long it had been since she had eaten anything substantial. Yeah, I could eat. Jake motioned for her to follow him, and they made their way to a small kitchen area tucked in the corner of the garage. It was a simple setup, just a stove, a few cabinets, and a small table, but to Emma, it felt like the heart of the place. Jake was already pulling out ingredients to make breakfast. Emma watched quietly as he moved around, his actions calm and deliberate. There was something comforting about the way he moved, like he was used to taking care of himself and others. What's your name? He asked suddenly, as he cracked eggs into a pan. Emma blinked, taken aback by the question. You don't know my name? She asked, feeling a little foolish. Jake raised an eyebrow but didn't stop cooking. I never asked, he said simply. I'm Jake, by the way. Emma smiled softly. Emma, she replied. It's nice to meet you, Jake. Jake nodded, flipping the eggs with a practiced hand. They ate breakfast in silence, the only sound the soft clinking of utensils against plates and the occasional crackle from the stove. Emma felt strangely content in the quiet, as though the world outside had momentarily faded away. After breakfast, Jake stood up and grabbed his leather jacket, slipping it on as he prepared to leave. You should stay here for a while, he said, his voice firm but not unkind. It's not safe for you to be out there alone. Emma blinked, a knot tightening in her chest. But I don't want to be a burden, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Jake paused, looking at her with an expression that was impossible to read. You're not a burden, he said quietly. You don't have to be alone anymore. Emma swallowed, her emotions threatening to spill over. She had been alone for so long, too long, and hearing those words from Jake made something inside her shift. For the first time in ages, she allowed herself to believe that maybe things could be different. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a place where she wasn't invisible. Thank you, she whispered, looking down at her hands. Jake gave a brief nod, then headed toward the door. I'll be back later. Stay here. Stay safe. Emma watched him leave, the sound of his boots echoing as he walked out. She stood in the middle of the garage, the silence settling around her once more. But this time, it felt different. This time, it felt like hope. She glanced over at the small couch where she had slept, and then back at the door. The world outside was still there, still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Emma felt like she had a chance to start over. She wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. She was ready to face whatever came next, knowing she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning to live. The days that followed were different for Emma. She had never stayed in one place for so long, and it felt strange to her, in a way she couldn't quite describe. The garage, which had once felt like a temporary refuge, was slowly becoming something more, a place where she could breathe, where the weight of the world didn't feel so heavy. Jake, though quiet and reserved, was always there when she needed him. He didn't ask for anything in return, yet his presence made her feel like she wasn't invisible anymore. She spent her days helping him around the garage, cleaning tools, organizing parts, anything to keep herself busy. It felt good to be productive, to have a purpose again. Jake, for his part, seemed content to have her around. He didn't say much, but every now and then, he would smile at her as they worked side by side. Emma could tell that he appreciated her company, though he never mentioned it outright. One morning, Jake came into the garage with a set of keys in his hand. I need to run some errands, he said, looking at her. Do you want to come with me? Emma looked up, surprised. Errands? She asked. Yeah, he said, his tone casual. Just picking up some parts, getting a few things sorted. I figured you might want to stretch your legs. Emma hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. She hadn't left the garage in days, and the idea of seeing something beyond the four walls that had become her new world was tempting. Sure, she said. Jake gave a slight nod, and they both walked out of the garage together. The sunlight was bright, and Emma squinted against the warmth of the day. She hadn't realized how much she missed the sun until now. They walked to Jake's old pickup truck, which was parked just outside the garage. It was a beat-up thing, but it had character. As they got into the truck, Emma couldn't help but notice how comfortable she felt next to Jake, even in the quiet moments when neither of them said anything. As they drove through the town, Emma's eyes wandered over the familiar streets. It had been a long time since she had seen the town with fresh eyes, and now, it felt almost strange. She had spent so many years feeling like an outsider here, like she didn't belong. But now, as she looked at the familiar storefronts, the small houses, the people going about their daily lives, something in her heart began to soften. Maybe, just maybe, she could belong here. As they reached the auto parts store, Jake parked the truck and turned to her. "Stay in the truck," he said. "I won't be long." Emma nodded, watching as he got out and walked toward the store. She leaned back in her seat, letting the quiet hum of the engine soothe her. It was a strange feeling, this peace, but it was also a welcome one. She had forgotten what it felt like to just sit and breathe, without the weight of fear or worry hanging over her. A few minutes passed before Jake returned, a couple of bags in his hand. He opened the door and climbed back into the truck, starting the engine. "All right," he said, turning to Emma. "Back to the garage." Emma didn't say anything at first, just nodded. But as they drove back, something inside her stirred. "Jake," she said softly, after a long pause. "Why are you helping me?" Jake glanced over at her, his expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice calm. Emma swallowed, unsure of how to put her thoughts into words. "I don't get it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You don't even know me. And yet you're doing all this for me. What?" Jake was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. Emma waited, feeling her heart race in her chest. She didn't know why she was asking this. Maybe it was because she had never had anyone show her this kind of kindness before. Maybe it was because she wanted to understand why this man, a stranger, was treating her like she mattered. Finally, Jake spoke, his voice low and steady. "I guess I see something in you," he said. "I know what it's like to feel alone, to feel like you don't have anyone. I don't want you to go through that." His words hit Emma like a wave, and for the first time in a long time, she felt her defenses start to crumble. She had always kept her guard up, afraid to trust anyone, afraid to let anyone in. But Jake was different. He wasn't asking for anything in return. He wasn't judging her. He was just there. "Thank you," she whispered, barely able to speak. Jake glanced over at her, offering a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You don't have to thank me," he said quietly. "It's the least I can do." As they pulled back into the garage, Emma's heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she might just have a chance at something better. A chance at a life where she wasn't alone, where she wasn't just surviving. A chance to live. Jake parked the truck and turned off the engine. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their conversation lingering in the air. Emma opened the door and stepped out, feeling the ground beneath her feet like it was the first time she had truly stood still in a long while. As she walked back toward the garage, she looked up at Jake, who was standing by the truck, watching her. He gave her a small nod, and for the first time, Emma smiled. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind her that sometimes, the people who come into your life, the ones who help you when you least expect it, can change everything. Days passed, and Emma settled into her new routine. The garage, which had once felt like an unfamiliar refuge, now felt like home. She spent her days helping Jake, cleaning, organizing, and even learning a little about fixing motorcycles. The more time she spent with him, the more she realized that Jake wasn't just some tough biker. He was a man who had been through his own battles and had come out on the other side with a heart that still cared. It was a heart that had found a way to protect her without expecting anything in return. Jake didn't ask about her past, and she didn't offer it. There was something unspoken between them, a mutual understanding that both of them had been through enough pain and didn't need to revisit it. But that didn't stop Emma from feeling a sense of gratitude toward him every single day. She started to open up, bit by bit, the walls she had built up around herself starting to crack. One afternoon, after a long day of working in the garage, Jake turned to her with a serious look on his face. "Emma," he said, his voice low and steady, "I've been thinking. I want you to be able to go to school. Emma's eyes widened. School? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. She had almost forgotten what it was like to be a regular kid, going to school, making friends, learning things. Yeah, Jake said, nodding. I know it's been a while, but I think it's time you get back to a normal life. You deserve that. Emma hesitated. She hadn't been to school in what felt like forever, and the idea of walking into a classroom full of strangers made her heart race. I don't know, she said softly, looking down at her hands. I don't think I can. Jake crouched down in front of her, gently lifting her chin so their eyes met. Hey, it's okay to be scared, he said. But I think you're stronger than you realize. And you don't have to do it alone. I'll be here. We'll do it together. His words were simple, but they made Emma feel like maybe, just maybe, she could do it. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that things could get better, that maybe she could have a future. Okay, she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. I'll try. Jake smiled, his eyes softening. That's all I'm asking for. Over the next few days, Jake helped Emma get ready for school. He found her a backpack, some clothes, and even helped her with the paperwork to get her enrolled. The process felt overwhelming at times, but Jake was patient, always there to guide her and offer a steady hand when she needed it. When the first day of school finally arrived, Emma stood in front of the mirror, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never felt more nervous in her life. The thought of walking into a classroom full of strangers, of sitting at a desk, felt like a mountain she wasn't sure she could climb. Jake stood behind her, watching her with a quiet intensity. You're gonna do great, he said softly. Emma turned to him, her eyes wide with uncertainty. What if they don't like me? She asked. What if I don't fit in? Jake crouched down in front of her again, his hands resting on her shoulders. You don't need to fit in, Emma, he said. You just need to be yourself. And if anyone can handle whatever comes their way, it's you. Emma swallowed, feeling a lump form in her throat. Thank you, she whispered. Jake gave her a reassuring smile. No need to thank me. Just remember, you've got this. As they walked out to the truck, Emma felt a mix of fear and excitement coursing through her. She wasn't sure what to expect, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was moving forward. The world was still a big place, and there were a lot of unknowns, but she wasn't alone anymore. Jake had taught her that, and it made all the difference. The school was small, just a few blocks away from the garage, but it felt like a whole new world to Emma. As she walked through the gates, she felt like everyone's eyes were on her. She could feel the weight of their gazes, their curiosity, and it made her stomach twist. She had spent so long being invisible, so long being the girl no one noticed, that the idea of standing out made her uneasy. But she took a deep breath, remembering Jake's words. You've got this. She walked into the school, her head held high, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know how things would go, but she knew that for the first time in a long time, she had a chance. And that was enough. The rest of the day went by in a blur. The classrooms were full of faces she didn't recognize, and the voices of the other kids made her feel small and out of place. But as the day wore on, she started to feel a little more comfortable. She made it through lunch without completely embarrassing herself, and she even managed to speak up in class a few times. By the time the bell rang to end the school day, Emma was exhausted but proud of herself. She had made it through the day, and somehow, that felt like a victory. When she got back to the garage, Jake was there waiting for her, as always. How was it? He asked, his eyes full of curiosity. Emma smiled, her face lighting up with the first real smile she had had in days. It was good, she said. I think I'm going to be okay. Jake's eyes softened as he looked at her. I knew you would be. And for the first time in a long time, Emma believed him. The days turned into weeks, and Emma continued to settle into her new life. She had made a routine of going to school and spending her afternoons in the garage with Jake, learning more about the world of motorcycles, tools, and the quiet art of fixing things. She still wasn't entirely comfortable in school, but the anxiety had started to fade. It wasn't easy, but every day felt like another step forward. Her classmates had started to warm up to her, even if they didn't fully understand her. It was enough for her to know that she was no longer invisible. Jake, too, had become a steady presence in her life. She had learned to trust him in ways she hadn't trusted anyone before. There was a calmness about him, a quiet strength that made her feel safe. He never asked her about her past, never pushed her to open up, and in return, she didn't press him either. They didn't need to talk about everything. They both understood what it meant to carry a burden, to carry scars that weren't always visible. One evening, as Emma sat on the couch in the garage, watching Jake work on his bike, she found herself thinking about the future. It was strange to think that just a few weeks ago, she had been wandering the streets, feeling hopeless and alone, face tired but kind. Yeah. Do you ever think about what comes next? She asked. Jake raised an eyebrow, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. What do you mean? I don't know, she said, her voice unsure. Like, where does this all go? I mean, I'm going to school, I have a place to stay, but what happens after that? Jake stood up, wiping his hands on a rag before walking over to her. He sat down on the couch next to her, his presence calm and steady. You mean, like, what happens after school? He asked, his voice thoughtful. Emma nodded. Yeah, I mean, I don't even know what I want to do yet. But sometimes it feels like I'm just going through the motions. Jake was silent for a moment, his eyes on the workbench behind her, as if considering her words. You know, he said finally, life doesn't always have to be about having everything figured out. You just take one step at a time, and eventually, you'll get where you need to go. Emma turned to look at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and hope. You really think that? I do, Jake said with a small, reassuring smile. I've been through a lot of shit, Emma. And I've learned that sometimes you don't need to have all the answers right away. Sometimes, you just need to keep going. Emma looked down at her hands, her mind racing. I don't know if I can keep going, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. What if I fail? Jake's expression softened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder. You won't fail, he said firmly. Not as long as you keep trying. And I'll be here to help you. Every step of the way. Emma's heart skipped a beat at his words. She had never felt more reassured, more certain that, for the first time in a long time, things could be okay. The next few days were a blur of school and work in the garage, but Emma started to notice something in herself that she hadn't seen before, a quiet confidence, a growing belief that maybe she wasn't as lost as she had once thought. At school, she started participating more in class, and while she still felt a little out of place at times, she knew she was starting to find her footing. It was small, but it was enough. Jake, as usual, was a steady anchor in her life. He didn't expect anything from her, didn't pressure her, but his quiet support was like a safety net she could always rely on. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Jake turned to Emma, his face serious. I need to talk to you about something, he said. Emma looked up at him, concern crossing her face. What is it? I've been thinking, Jake said, his voice thoughtful. You've been through a lot, and I know you've got a lot on your mind. But I think it's time for you to start thinking about what you want. What makes you happy? Emma felt a knot form in her stomach. What do you mean? I mean, Jake said, you've been so focused on surviving, on getting by, that I think you've forgotten what it feels like to have dreams. To want something more than just getting through the day. Emma was silent for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. She had been so focused on surviving, on simply making it through each day, that she hadn't really thought about what she wanted. What did she want? It was a question she hadn't asked herself in years. I don't know, she said, her voice quiet. I don't even know what I want anymore. Jake nodded, his expression understanding. That's okay, he said softly. You don't have to have all the answers right now, but you need to start thinking about it. What do you want out of life, Emma? Emma sat back, her mind racing as she tried to imagine a future beyond survival. For the first time, she allowed herself to dream. It felt strange, like she was opening a door she had kept shut for a long time. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to walk through that door. Jake was right. It was time to start living, not just existing. She looked at him, a sense of determination rising in her chest. I'm going to figure it out, she said quietly. I don't know how yet, but I will. Jake smiled, a proud look on his face. I know you will, he said. You're stronger than you think. Emma smiled back, a weight lifting off her shoulders. For the first time, in a long time, she felt like she had a chance at something more. A chance at a future she could choose for herself. The weeks that followed were a quiet kind of change. Emma continued her routine of school and helping Jake in the garage. Her classmates, though still unfamiliar and distant, began to accept her. She wasn't just the girl who didn't belong anymore. She was becoming part of something. It was small, but it was hers. She smiled more, laughed more, and found herself getting excited for each new day. Jake, too, seemed to find a rhythm in their quiet life together. He had always been a man of few words, but he made sure Emma knew she was never truly alone. They spent more time talking in the evenings, discussing the small things that made up the days. Jake shared stories of his past, about the places he had been and the people he had known. Emma listened, fascinated by his life, but also struck by how much he had kept to himself. He never spoke of the pain, the mistakes, or the regrets, only the lessons he had learned. One evening, as they sat in the garage, Jake turned to Emma. "You've been doing well," he said, his voice steady. "How do you feel about school now?" Emma looked up at him, the question catching her off guard. "It's better," she said slowly. "I still get nervous sometimes, but it's better." Jake nodded, his face softening. "That's good. You're starting to see that you can handle it." Emma smiled, but there was a glint of something in her eyes. "I don't know. It's still hard sometimes, but I feel like I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm actually living." Jake studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, just slightly, and it made Emma's heart lift. "You're doing more than just living, Emma. You're learning how to live for yourself." Emma felt a wave of warmth spread through her. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words until now. "I never thought I could," she admitted quietly. "I always thought I was just going to get by, but now it feels different." Jake didn't say anything, just nodded. "You've got a lot of potential, Emma. You just needed to see it for yourself." The next few days were uneventful, but Emma felt like something inside her had shifted. She felt more grounded, more certain of herself than she ever had before. One morning, after school, Emma found herself sitting outside on the porch of the garage, watching the sun dip low in the sky. The world was quieter here, away from the noise of the city and the chaos that used to fill her life. For the first time in a long time, Emma felt at peace. She didn't know what the future held. There were still so many questions, so many things she couldn't answer. But for once, she wasn't afraid to find out. She felt a sense of purpose now, a sense of belonging. Jake came out, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked at her for a moment before sitting beside her. "You all right?" he asked, his voice calm and steady as always. "Yeah," Emma said with a small smile. "I'm good." Jake nodded. "That's good." They sat in silence for a while, both of them watching the sky as the colors changed. The air was cool, and Emma felt the weight of everything she had been through lifting off her shoulders. It was like she was finally breathing freely for the first time in years. After a while, she turned to Jake. "Jake," she said softly, "I want to do something with my life. Something that matters." Jake looked at her, his eyes searching hers for a moment before he spoke. "You will," he said. "You're already doing it." Emma was quiet, the weight of his words sinking in. For so long, she had just been trying to survive, trying to make it through the day. But now, for the first time, she felt like she was building something. Something real. Something that mattered. "I want to help people," she said, her voice full of certainty. "I want to make a difference." Jake nodded, his expression softening. "You've got a big heart, Emma," he said quietly. "You've always had it in you." Emma smiled, feeling her heart swell with emotion. "I'm going to find my way," she said, more to herself than to Jake. "And I won't stop until I do." Jake didn't say anything else, but his silence spoke volumes. He gave her a small nod, as if he believed her words as much as she did. As the sun set behind the mountains, Emma felt a quiet resolve settle within her. She didn't know what was ahead, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she was on the right path, a path that was hers to choose. The future didn't seem so scary anymore. It was full of possibilities, of chances to build something new, and Emma was ready for it. The next chapter of her life was just beginning, and she was determined to make it one worth living. The weeks that followed felt like a new beginning for Emma. She had found a rhythm in her life, a steady beat that had once seemed impossible. School had become more than just something to get through. It was now a place where she was starting to carve out a future. The kids who once seemed so distant were now beginning to include her, to ask her to sit with them during lunch, to talk with her in between classes. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and that was enough for Emma. Jake, too, seemed to sense the change in her. He still didn't ask questions about her past, and he never pressured her to talk about things she wasn't ready to share. But every day, there was a quiet encouragement in his actions. He was teaching her not just about motorcycles, but about life, about moving forward. One evening, as they worked together in the garage, Jake turned to Emma, wiping his hands on a rag. "You've been doing great," he said, his voice soft but steady. "You've come a long way." Emma looked up at him, feeling a warmth spread through her chest at his words. "Thanks," she said, her voice quiet. "I feel like I'm finally figuring things out." Jake smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You always were," he said simply. "You just needed to see it for yourself." That night, as Emma lay in bed, she thought about his words. She had always felt like she was just barely keeping her head above water, like she was always on the verge of being swallowed by the world around her. But now, for the first time, she felt like she was standing on solid ground. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. The next day, after school, Emma sat down at her desk to do some homework. She was starting to enjoy the challenge of learning, of discovering new things. It wasn't easy, but it felt good to know that she was capable of more than she had ever given herself credit for. As she worked through the assignments, her mind wandered back to Jake. She hadn't realized just how much he had taught her until now. He had shown her that there was more to life than just surviving. He had shown her what it meant to fight for something, to care about something bigger than yourself. And maybe, just maybe, she could do the same. After finishing her homework, Emma decided to take a walk. The weather was warm, the sun just beginning to dip below the horizon, and she needed some time to think. She walked through the small town, her steps slow but purposeful. She had always felt like an outsider here, like she didn't belong. But now, as she walked the familiar streets, she saw something different. She saw the possibility of a future here, of a life that was hers to build. She could feel the change in herself, in the way she carried herself, in the way she looked at the world. It wasn't the same world that had once felt so cold and unwelcoming. Now, it was full of opportunities. As she turned a corner, she spotted a small cafe that she had never noticed before. The door was open, and she could see people inside, chatting over cups of coffee, laughing, and enjoying the warmth of the afternoon. Something inside her stirred. She walked up to the door, hesitated for just a moment, and then stepped inside. The bell above the door jingled, and a woman behind the counter looked up, smiling warmly at Emma. "Hey there," the woman said. "What can I get for you?" Emma paused, unsure of what to say. "Just a coffee, please," she said, her voice a little nervous. The woman nodded and started to prepare the coffee. As Emma waited, she looked around the cafe. The atmosphere was warm and inviting, the kind of place where people could relax and feel at home. And for the first time in a long time, Emma felt like she belonged. The woman handed her the coffee, and Emma took a sip, the rich warmth of it spreading through her. "You new around here?" the woman asked, her voice friendly. Emma nodded. "Yeah, just moved here recently." "Well, welcome," the woman said with a smile. "Hope you like it here." Emma smiled back, feeling a sense of comfort in the simple exchange. "I think I will," she said. As she walked out of the cafe, coffee in hand, Emma felt a sense of possibility stirring inside her. This was the life she was building, one step at a time. And for the first time in a long time, she was excited about what came next. She didn't have all the answers, and she didn't know exactly what the future held, but she was starting to realize that it was hers to shape. That night, after dinner, Jake noticed the change in her. "You okay?" he asked, his eyes searching her face. Emma smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. "Yeah," she said, her voice full of quiet confidence. "I'm more than okay. I'm finally figuring it out." Jake didn't say anything else, just gave her a small nod, as if he understood exactly what she meant. And for the first time, Emma truly believed it. She was figuring it out. She was building a life, step by step, and nothing felt more real than that. The months passed, and Emma continued to grow in ways she never thought possible. With each passing day, she felt more at home in the small town. School became less of a challenge and more of a place where she could push herself further. She joined a few clubs, made friends, and even started to feel a sense of pride when she walked through the halls. It wasn't easy, but it was hers, and for the first time, she felt like she was building a future. Jake had been her rock through it all. He was always there when she needed him, guiding her with patience and quiet strength. He never expected anything from her, never pushed her to be anything other than herself. And through his actions, Emma learned more than she ever thought she would. One afternoon, after school, Emma sat in the garage, her homework spread out in front of her. Jake was working on one of his bikes. As usual, the sound of his tools clinking filling the air. She looked up at him, watching his steady hands move with precision. "Jake," she called out, her voice hesitant. He glanced up from his work, a slight frown on his face. "What's up?" he asked. Emma paused for a moment, unsure of how to express the thought that had been swirling in her mind for days. "I've been thinking," she began slowly, "about what comes next. After school, I mean." Jake set down his tools and wiped his hands on a rag. He walked over to her, his expression thoughtful. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice calm. "I don't know," Emma said, her fingers tracing the edge of her notebook. "I mean, I want to help people. I know that now, but I don't know how to make it happen. I don't know where to start." Jake nodded, as if he had been expecting this conversation. "You're already on the right path," he said quietly. "You're doing something important just by being here, just by showing up every day." Emma looked up at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "But I want more than that," she said, her voice small. "I want to make a real difference." Jake studied her for a moment, his gaze intense. "You will," he said finally. "You already are. It's not about one big moment. It's about the small things. The things you do every day that add up over time." Emma wasn't sure if she believed him, but there was something in his voice, something steady and unwavering, that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, he was right. "But how do I know what I'm supposed to do?" she asked, the question hanging in the air between them. "You won't know right away," Jake said with a small smile. "But that's okay. You just keep moving forward, and eventually, you'll find your way." Emma nodded slowly, taking in his words. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she wasn't just going through the motions. A future where she was helping others, making a difference, and doing something that truly mattered. She wasn't sure what it would look like, but the thought gave her a sense of peace she hadn't felt before. Over the next few weeks, Emma threw herself into her schoolwork and began volunteering at a local community center. It wasn't much, but it felt like a step in the right direction. She worked with kids after school, helping them with their homework and playing games. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was fulfilling in a way that surprised her. One afternoon, as she was helping a group of kids with a craft project, Emma felt a small hand tug at her sleeve. She turned to see a young boy, no older than 7, looking up at her with wide eyes. "Can you help me, Miss Emma?" he asked shyly, holding up a piece of paper covered in scribbles. Emma smiled down at him and knelt to his level. "Of course," she said, taking the paper from him. As she helped him trace the letters on the page, Emma felt a sense of purpose fill her. This was what she wanted to do. This was where she belonged. That evening, after she got home, Emma sat at the kitchen table, thinking about everything she had learned over the past few months. She had come a long way since the days when she felt like she was drifting aimlessly through life. She had found something to care about, something that made her feel like she mattered. And it wasn't just about helping others. It was about finding herself, too. She glanced over at Jake, who was sitting at the counter, a mug of coffee in his hands. He looked up at her and smiled, as if sensing the shift in her. "You good?" he asked. Emma nodded, her eyes shining with a quiet determination. "Yeah," she said softly. "I'm good." Jake's smile widened, and for a moment, they just sat there, the silence comfortable between them. It was a small moment, but it felt like everything was finally falling into place. The road ahead wasn't always going to be easy, but Emma was no longer afraid of what the future held. She had a purpose now. She had a direction, and she wasn't going to stop until she figured out how to make a real difference. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Emma continued to grow. She applied to colleges, researched programs that would help her develop the skills she needed, and started to dream bigger. It was all still a little scary, but she wasn't alone anymore. She had Jake, and she had herself, and that was enough to keep her moving forward. One evening, as they sat together in the garage, Emma turned to Jake. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice full of resolve. "I know what I want to do now. I want to work with kids, help them like I've been helped." Jake looked at her with pride. "I think you're going to be great at it," he said quietly. "You've got a big heart, Emma." Emma smiled, feeling the weight of his words settle inside her. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. As the months went on, Emma continued to make strides in her life. Each day felt like a step forward, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in how far she had come. She had found something that made her feel like she belonged, something that sparked a fire inside her. Her time at school was still challenging at times, but the moments of anxiety were fewer and farther apart. She had found a few close friends who had started to look out for her, and she did the same in return. It felt like she was finally part of something, a community, a place where she could grow. In the evenings, she would help Jake with the garage, learning more about the intricacies of bike repairs. She didn't understand everything yet, but she enjoyed the quiet work. There was something therapeutic about fixing something, watching it come together from a pile of scattered pieces. It reminded her of how her own life had been pieced together, slowly but surely. One evening, as the sun began to set, Jake turned to her as they were finishing up a project. "Emma," he said, his voice serious but kind. "You've been working hard, I've noticed. You've got a lot of potential, you know." Emma smiled, but felt a pang of uncertainty. "Thanks, Jake," she said quietly, wiping her hands on a rag. "But I still feel like I'm just figuring things out. There's so much I don't know." Jake studied her for a moment, his gaze steady. "You're doing great. But there's one thing you need to realize." He paused, letting the silence settle between them. Emma looked up at him, her brow furrowed in curiosity. "What's that?" "You don't need to have all the answers right now," Jake said. "You just need to keep moving forward. You're already ahead of where you think you are. The rest will come." Emma thought about his words for a moment. She had spent so much time trying to plan everything out, trying to figure out what came next. But maybe Jake was right. Maybe the answer wasn't in having everything figured out right now. Maybe it was about the journey, about taking one step at a time. The next day, Emma took the advice to heart. She showed up to school with a little more confidence, holding her head just a little higher. She didn't have all the answers, but that didn't matter as much anymore. She was learning, growing, and she was exactly where she needed to be. That afternoon, she met with a counselor at school to discuss her future. She had been hesitant at first, unsure if she was ready to take that step. But after Jake's words, she felt ready to start thinking about the next chapter. As they sat together in the counselor's office, Emma explained her interest in working with kids, maybe even pursuing a career in social work or education. The counselor listened attentively, asking questions and guiding her through the possibilities. For the first time, Emma felt like someone was listening to her, like her dreams mattered. "You've got a lot of great qualities, Emma," the counselor said as their conversation came to a close. "It sounds like you have a real passion for helping others. That's something we can definitely work with." Emma left the counselor's office with a renewed sense of purpose. She had no idea exactly how everything would unfold, but for the first time, she didn't feel like she was just guessing. She felt like she was on the right path. Later that evening, as she sat with Jake in the garage, Emma couldn't help but smile. "I had a meeting today," she said, her voice a little more upbeat than usual. "I talked to a counselor about what I want to do. It feels different now. I think I'm finally figuring out what comes next." Jake looked up from his work, his eyes filled with quiet pride. "I knew you would," he said softly. "You've got it in you, Emma." The words were simple, but they meant the world to her. She had always doubted herself, always wondered if she could really make a difference. But now it felt like she could. She was starting to see the pieces come together, starting to see that she wasn't just a survivor. She was someone who could create the life she wanted. As the days continued to pass, Emma kept moving forward. She researched programs and scholarships, started reaching out to local organizations, and even began volunteering more. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but she knew that whatever came next, she was ready for it. And through it all, Jake remained a steady presence in her life. He didn't ask for anything in return, but every time she looked at him, she saw the quiet belief he had in her. He had always been there for her, even when she couldn't see the way forward. Now, Emma was beginning to believe in herself, just as much as Jake had believed in her all along. One evening, after finishing her work in the garage, Emma sat on the porch, watching the sunset. She took a deep breath, the cool evening air filling her lungs. For the first time in years, she felt at peace. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding. She was standing on solid ground, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she had control over her future. She didn't know what the road ahead would look like, but she knew she was ready to walk it, step by step. And no matter what came her way, she wasn't going to face it alone. Jake had taught her that, and for the first time, Emma truly believed it. As the months went by, Emma began to see more of the world around her with fresh eyes. Each day felt like a new opportunity, and the weight of uncertainty that had once clung to her was slowly lifting. Her life, which had once felt like a collection of broken pieces, was now taking shape into something solid and real. School continued to be a challenge, but it was one she was willing to face head-on. She no longer saw it as a daunting task, but as a chance to learn, to grow, and to find her place in the world. One evening, as the golden hues of the sunset cast long shadows over the garage, Jake walked in, wiping his hands on a rag. "How's it going?" he asked, his voice steady as always. Emma looked up from her homework, her face lighting up with a smile. "It's going well," she said, her voice full of confidence. "I think I might actually pass my next math test." Jake chuckled, leaning against the workbench. "I knew you could do it," he said, his eyes filled with quiet pride. "You've got a good head on your shoulders." Emma felt a rush of gratitude toward him. It had taken her a while to believe in herself, but Jake had always believed in her. He had never once doubted that she was capable of more than just surviving. She had found comfort in that, a quiet kind of strength that allowed her to keep pushing forward, even when things seemed impossible. The next morning, Emma found herself walking to school with a sense of purpose. It wasn't just about getting through the day anymore. It was about making the most of each moment, about seizing the opportunities that life had to offer. She had been given a second chance, and she wasn't going to waste it. As she walked through the school gates, she felt a shift in herself. She wasn't the same girl who had first stepped foot into this school, unsure of who she was or where she belonged. She had found a sense of confidence, a sense of belonging, and it felt like everything was finally coming together. In the weeks that followed, Emma continued to push herself. She volunteered at the community center, worked hard at school, and spent her afternoons in the garage with Jake, learning more about the things she loved. She had started to realize that she wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a person with goals, with dreams, and she was willing to do whatever it took to make them a reality. One evening, after a long day of work at the community center, Emma sat down on the porch of the garage, looking up at the stars. The sky was clear, and the night air was cool against her skin. For the first time in a long time, Emma felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Jake came out to join her, his footsteps heavy but steady. He sat down beside her, his presence a comforting silence. "You're doing good, Emma," he said, his voice low and steady. "You've come a long way." Emma smiled, her eyes meeting his. "I still have a long way to go," she said softly, "but I'm getting there. I'm starting to believe that maybe I really can make something of myself." Jake nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "You can," he said simply. "You already have." Emma looked out at the vast stretch of land before her, the darkness of the night filled with potential. She wasn't the same girl who had once felt lost and invisible. She was someone new now, someone stronger, someone with a purpose. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was ready to take on whatever came next. In the days that followed, Emma continued to work hard. She had applied to colleges and started looking into scholarships, determined to make her dreams a reality. She didn't know exactly where the road would lead, but she knew that she was no longer afraid to walk it. She had a sense of direction now, and that made all the difference. One evening, as they worked together in the garage, Emma turned to Jake, her face serious. "Jake," she said, her voice full of conviction, "I've been thinking. I want to make a real difference in the world. I want to help kids who feel like I did, like they don't have a place to belong." Jake stopped what he was doing, his eyes meeting hers. There was no judgment in his gaze, only quiet understanding. "I think you'll be great at that," he said softly. "You've always had a way of making people feel seen, Emma. You'll help more people than you know." Emma smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her at his words. She had always feared that her past would define her, that she would always be the girl who had been lost, broken, and invisible. But now, she realized that her past didn't have to define her. She had the power to create a future of her own. And with Jake's support, she felt like anything was possible. The next few months were a blur of hard work, school, and personal growth. Emma continued to build on the foundation she had created, working toward her goals with determination and focus. She didn't have all the answers, but she no longer felt the need to have everything figured out. She had learned that life wasn't about having all the answers right away. It was about taking each step with purpose and trusting that the rest would follow. One evening, after a long day of school and work, Emma sat down at the kitchen table with Jake, a sense of quiet satisfaction filling her. "I got into college," she said, her voice full of excitement. Jake looked up from his work, his eyes widening in surprise. "That's amazing, Emma," he said, a broad smile spreading across his face. I knew you could do it. Emma smiled back, feeling a swell of pride in her chest. I couldn't have done it without you, she said quietly. You've always been there for me, Jake. Jake nodded, his smile softening. You've always had it in you, Emma, he said. I'm just glad I got to be a part of it. Emma looked at him, a wave of gratitude washing over her. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. Jake gave her a small nod, his eyes filled with quiet pride. You've earned it, he said simply. Emma smiled, her heart full. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to face it alone. With Jake by her side, she felt like she could take on anything. And for the first time, she truly believed that her future was hers to shape. The day Emma received her acceptance letter to college felt like a dream come true. She had worked so hard, and yet, when the envelope finally arrived, she couldn't quite believe it was real. She held the letter in her hands, her heart racing as she read the words over and over again. Asterisk congratulations, Emma. You've been accepted to our program. Asterisk it was the culmination of months of uncertainty, hard work, and small victories that had added up over time. But as she stood in the kitchen, staring at the letter, she realized something that surprised her. It wasn't the acceptance letter itself that made her feel accomplished. It was the journey she had taken to get there. She had fought through so many obstacles, self-doubt, fear of failure, and the weight of her past. But now, looking at that letter, she understood that all of those struggles had shaped her into someone capable of more than she had ever imagined. Jake walked into the room just as she was folding the letter carefully. He looked at her, a slight smile playing on his lips. Well, he asked, his voice filled with curiosity. Emma turned to him, her eyes shining. I did it, she said simply, holding up the letter. I got in. Jake's face softened, and he crossed the room to stand beside her. He looked at the letter in her hand, then back at Emma, his gaze full of pride. I knew you would, he said quietly. Emma smiled, feeling the weight of his words settle in her heart. It was one thing to achieve something on her own, but it was another to have someone like Jake in her corner, believing in her even when she couldn't believe in herself. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Jake gave a small nod, his eyes filled with something unspoken. You've earned it, he said. You've earned more than you realize. The next few days were a blur of excitement and nerves. Emma shared the news with her friends and family, each person congratulating her and offering words of encouragement. But despite all the praise, she couldn't help but feel a nagging doubt in the back of her mind. College was the next step in her life, but she wasn't sure she was ready. The fear of failure had been a constant companion in her life, and now, as she stood on the threshold of something new, it resurfaced. One afternoon, as she sat at the kitchen table, going over some college materials, Jake sat down across from her. What's going on? He asked, his tone gentle. Emma looked up at him, surprised to find that her feelings had gotten the best of her. I don't know, she admitted. I've worked so hard for this, but now that it's real, I'm scared. What if I can't do it? What if I fail? Jake studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he spoke, his voice steady and calm. You're scared because this is something new, something big. But that doesn't mean you're not ready. You've been ready all along. The fact that you're scared just means you care. You want to succeed, and that's a good thing. It means you'll work for it, and you'll keep going even when it gets tough. Emma listened, her heart calming with each word he spoke. But what if I can't handle it? She asked quietly. Jake smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. You'll handle it, he said simply. You always have. You've got more strength in you than you give yourself credit for. And when you need help, you won't be alone. You've got people who believe in you, and that includes me. Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had never realized how much Jake's words meant to her until now. He had always been there for her, guiding her with quiet support. And now, as she stood at the edge of something new, his belief in her gave her the strength to believe in herself. Thank you, Jake, she said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. I don't know what I would have done without you. Jake gave a small, reassuring nod. You would have done just fine, he said. But I'm glad I could be a part of it. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Emma packed her bags, filled out forms, and said her goodbyes. It was a time of excitement and change, but it was also a time of reflection. As she packed up her things, she thought about everything she had been through to get to this point. The pain, the struggle, the fear, It had all led her here. And now, as she prepared to leave the garage and the town she had come to call home, she knew that the road ahead was still uncertain. But for the first time, she felt ready to face it. When the day came for her to leave, Jake drove her to the bus station. They sat in comfortable silence as they drove, the familiar hum of the engine filling the space between them. When they arrived, Emma turned to Jake, her voice soft. "I'm going to miss you," she said, the words carrying more weight than she had intended. Jake smiled, a small but genuine smile. "You'll be fine, Emma," he said. "You've got everything you need." Emma looked at him, feeling a lump form in her throat. "I'm scared," she admitted, "but I know I have to do this." Jake nodded, his gaze steady. "You're not alone," he said. "And you don't have to have it all figured out. Just keep moving forward. You'll find your way." Emma smiled, feeling the warmth of his words wrap around her like a blanket. She knew that no matter where life took her, she had already learned the most important lesson, that she was capable, that she was worthy, and that she was never truly alone. As the bus pulled away, Emma watched the town she had called home fade into the distance. She was scared, yes, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to face the future. She had a purpose now, and she was ready to live it. With every mile that took her further from home, she felt more and more like herself, like someone who had earned her place in the world. The road ahead was still unknown, but it was hers to walk, step by step. It had been a few months since Emma left for college, and the feeling of settling into a new life hadn't faded. She had managed to adjust to the hustle and bustle of campus life, the endless assignments, and the new faces she met every day. There were moments of uncertainty, but she held on to the confidence that had been growing within her ever since she left the town and the safety of the garage. The journey had been a challenging one, but it had also been incredibly rewarding. She had learned more about herself in the past few months than she ever thought possible. Still, there were times when she felt the weight of her past creep into her thoughts, reminding her of the struggles she had endured. But she always pushed those thoughts aside, determined to keep moving forward. It was late one night when Emma received a text message from Jake. She had been up late studying, the quiet hum of her dorm room filling the silence, when her phone buzzed on the desk. She picked it up and smiled as she read the message. "Just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. I'm proud of you, Emma. Keep going. You're doing great." Emma's heart warmed at the words. She had received countless messages of support from friends and professors, but there was something about hearing those words from Jake that made everything feel more real. She thought about how far she had come, from the scared, uncertain girl she had been when she first arrived at the garage, to the young woman standing on her own 2 feet, ready to face whatever the world had to offer. She texted him back, her fingers hovering over the keys for a moment before she typed. "Thank you, Jake. I'm doing okay. I'm still figuring things out, but I think I'm where I need to be." The reply came almost instantly. "I have no doubt you're exactly where you need to be. Just keep your head up and take it one step at a time." Emma smiled as she read the message. She had never felt so sure of anything before. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving. She was living. She took a deep breath, put her phone down, and returned to her work. The next morning, she walked across campus, the sunlight warm on her face. She was starting to appreciate the little things about her new life, the quiet walks between classes, the excitement of learning something new, the sense of independence that came with being away from home. She had a lot of work ahead of her, but for the first time, she didn't mind. She had found something that fueled her, something that made her feel alive. As she sat in class, listening to the lecture, her mind wandered back to the garage and Jake's words. She had come a long way from that small town. She had learned to trust herself, to believe in her own strength, and most importantly, to embrace the future. For the first time, Emma felt like she could conquer whatever came next. Later that evening, as Emma sat at her desk in her dorm room, she couldn't help but think about the future. College had opened so many doors for her, but the next chapter of her life was still uncertain. What came after graduation? She didn't have all the answers, but she knew that whatever path she chose, she was ready. Jake had always taught her that it wasn't about having everything figured out right away. It was about taking things one step at a time, trusting that each step would lead her to where she was meant to be. She had learned that lesson well. The next day, Emma received another message from Jake. This time, it was a picture of the garage, a bit of a throwback to her earlier days there. She could see the familiar sight of the workbench, the scattered tools, and even the old motorcycle that had been Jake's pride and joy. Thought you might like to see this was all. The message said. Emma smiled as she looked at the picture. It felt like a lifetime ago when she had been in that garage, feeling lost and unsure of herself. Now, she was on a completely different path, one that was all her own. And yet, looking at the picture, she realized how much that time had shaped her. The lessons, the challenges, and the quiet support from Jake had been the foundation for everything she was building now. It wasn't just about fixing bikes or learning new skills. It was about learning to believe in herself, about finding her own strength, and about taking ownership of her future. A few days later, Emma made a call to Jake. She hadn't talked to him in a while, and she needed to hear his voice. When he answered, she could hear the familiar calm in his tone. "Hey Emma," he said. "How's school?" "It's going well," she said, a smile in her voice. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately. About everything. And I just wanted to thank you. For believing in me. For pushing me to be better." Jake was silent for a moment, and Emma could almost picture him standing there, his hands in his pockets, a thoughtful look on his face. "You don't need to thank me," he said finally. "You did all the work. I just gave you a little nudge in the right direction." Emma shook her head, though she knew he couldn't see her. "No," she said firmly. "You made all the difference. You showed me that I could do it, even when I didn't believe in myself." Jake's voice softened. "You always had it in you, Emma. You just needed to see it." Emma smiled, feeling a lump form in her throat. She had come so far, and as she prepared for the next phase of her life, she knew that she was ready for whatever challenges came her way. She wasn't the same girl who had first walked into the garage, unsure of herself. She was someone new, someone stronger, someone who believed in her own future. "Thank you," she whispered again, knowing that Jake would understand. "You're welcome," he replied softly. "I'll always be here, Emma, no matter what." Emma felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She wasn't alone anymore. And with that knowledge, she felt more ready than ever to take the next step on her journey.